Yakri here with another Dominions 4 video. This time I'm going to be showing you some expansion with the Middle Age nation Shinuyama. Now, Shinuyama is not a particularly strong nation, and expansion is one of their weaknesses. They're not as extremely bad as some other nations like Late Age Bogarus. Yeah, trying not to pronounce it wrong. But they're not particularly good at it, and the reason I'm going to show off expansion with a nation that isn't particularly great is expansion is in the hope that, once you get the hang of the game, you should be able to expand with most nations in the game better than this, and, you don't want to expect yourself to do considerably better than you actually will very often, so I think that's a good place to start. It's also a good excuse, sort of, to show off an expansion pretender. With some nations, you won't be using an expansion pretender. You'll just be recruiting an army and sending it out to fight, and then recruiting another army very quickly and sending it out to fight as well. But there are very few nations that can't make good use of an expansion pretender, and with the state of the game being what it is right now, expansion pretenders, especially the Earth Serpent, which is available to all nations, are particularly strong. It's not necessarily something that I or a lot of more experienced players particularly like, but it's the state of the game right now, and it's important to learn about it. It also makes for a fairly easy start for a lot of nations, which is fairly new player friendly. So let's look at the pretender I've created, so you'll see what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, I have kind of a lot here. Here we are. Okay, so this is our Earth Serpent, right? I've taken Earth 6 magic, and this is important because Earth magic gives your mage an additional point of protection for every point of Earth magic you have. So the Earth Serpent starts out with 20 protection, and it goes all the way up to 26 with Earth magic 6. And the reason this is important is because some of the toughest, nastiest indie troops that you can run into when you're expanding do about 20 damage. And this is basically what their average damage is going to be in most situations. Troops that do, 20 damage can roll less than that, they can roll more than that, but for every point more than some troops' average damage of protection you have, it becomes increasingly unlikely that they'll be able to damage you at all. With 26 points of protection, it's very unlikely that any basic troops will be able to deal damage to you. Now, you might wonder why it's so important for this big scary monster with 210 hit points to be so unlikely to be hurt. And the reason is because you're going to be facing 40 or 50 guys, and in Dominions, that's a fairly big challenge to overcome as a single unit. And so you are going to need to have a really big advantage to be able to overcome that. And the other thing is that you're going to be hit so many times that sooner or later someone's going to get lucky and land a critical hit. It's also possible that your unit can fatigue enough to become vulnerable to critical hits. What that generally means is that if you get over 50 fatigue, I believe it is, you can start taking damage at half your protection value, which would be 13, and which is much less ideal. So, you kind of want to overcompensate a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't actually expand with less. The Earth Serpent is perfectly capable of expanding with 24 protection at 4 Earth Magic. There are a lot of other pretenders that can expand with 18 or 19 protection. Often they'll have some other advantage, the Earth Serpent only has one attack, right? It has its Venomous Fangs. You can see that right here. It does a lot of damage, a huge amount of damage, really. The thing is, any random independence you expand into, even some giants will get killed almost instantly by this attack with the Earth Serpent's huge strength and all. But it only kills one guy per turn. So if you're fighting 50 guys, it takes 50 turns, and, however many guys can manage to surround you are all going to be getting to attack you that whole time, so that's pretty bad. There are some pretenders that get as many as 4 or 5 attacks, and clearing out 4 or 5 guys is actually pretty effective. And if you also happen to have some really powerful effect like Fear, which is what lets the Earth Serpent actually win fights against independent provinces, then you're going to scare away most of the troops very quickly without only killing a few of them. And you're not going to take a lot of damage, right? The Earth Serpent is going to get beat on for quite some time, so it really needs that advantage. So there's a little bit more that goes into it, and I might look at some other expansion pretenders in future videos. Certainly, when I cover more specific nations, I'll look at what pretenders might be good for them in particular. However, the Earth Serpent is available to all nations, and only a few nations that get strong Earth magic on their own don't really want to have the Earth Serpent because it's a little redundant for them. Shinuyama, I believe, gets a little bit of Earth magic. It's been a little bit since I've played the nation. I didn't brush up on them because I'm not going to try and cover most of the stuff the nation has, just their basic units and expanding with them for this video. But I think they have some Earth magic, but they like the Earth 6 anyway because Earth 6 gives you really convenient access to some rituals, and it gives you a big, powerful mage later on, right? When you start off with Earth Serpent, he's just going to run around killing things, right? But once you're, 20 or 30 turns into the game, and you've had some time to research some magic, especially for Shinuyama, you're going to be researching like Alteration and Evocation. And there's a lot of nations that are going to do similar things to this. And if you do that, then you're going to get access to some really nifty Earth spells that you can have a big Earth 6 mage go and cast along with your army. So this guy doesn't just stop being useful after you've expanded with him, but goes on to serve another purpose. Often that's fairly important. It is possible to have an expansion pretender who kind of just expands and kills a bunch of stuff and then dies. It's possible to do that. There are a couple nations that can have pretenders like that, and that's fine. But if you could do more, you would certainly like to. You want to get as much advantage out of this as possible. It's something that costs you a decent amount of points when you're creating your nation. Or creating your pretender. Really, when you create your pretender, that is your nation creation for Dominions, as I've explained previously. So that's something to keep in mind. And goes into why I've chosen him. So let's talk about some of the other specific abilities the Earth Serpent has, right? One of his more detrimental abilities is Cold-Blooded. This means if you have cold scales, right, if he's expanding into provinces that are cold, he's going to fatigue out very quickly. And I need to make another separate combat video, but suffice it to say that fatigue is bad and it will let small units actually be able to overwhelm and kill you. So you don't want that to happen. So if you're playing a nation that has like cold 3 scales, that's one of the nations that may not want to actually take this very powerful pretender. Poison resistant is great, almost never comes up. Mountain and swamp survival is actually pretty cool. These things let you mountain and swamp provinces, as well as forest provinces, reduce movement. Generally, because most units have between 1 and 3 map move in Dominions, this means it reduces your movement to 1 square per turn. Now, if you have mountain survival or swamp survival, when you're moving over mountain or swamp provinces, you ignore those penalties. It also means that for some specific spells on the battle map, you ignore their effects. Like there's at least one swamp specific spell that gives you all kinds of penalties if you're fighting in a swamp. I believe there are natural detrimental effects to fighting in a swamp as well for everyone who doesn't have swamp survival. So that's something to keep in mind. It's just kind of a nice advantage for the Earth Serpent to have. I believe it's mostly on the Earth Serpent for, flavor and lore reasons for what type, because it's a big Earth Snake, it's not really affected by swamps or mountains. Recuperation is a big one. This unit heals afflictions. What this means is that units in Dominions 4 can get really nasty afflictions, like they can get their arms cut off. Earth Serpent doesn't have arms, but if it did, it could get its arms cut off. They could get this never healing wound that reduces their max hit points. They could become feeble-minded, they get bashed in the head and lose their ability to cast magic effectively. All sorts of nasty things. One of the nastiest ones for pretenders is to become diseased, which means certain death, unless you can field one of a couple very hard to get counters for being diseased. Now, what recuperation means is that it will pretty quickly just heal any of these afflictions that it gets, which makes it a much more viable unit to send into the thick of combat. Now, for other units, you just expect them to die, but for a unit like the Earth Serpent, it's your god, it's expensive, and it's very powerful. You don't want it to die. That's very bad for you. So having something like that means that you can send it into combat again and again and again without steadily increasing its risk of death until it inevitably fails under the weight of its injuries. Let's talk about the scales I took. I don't want to go into a lot of detail about why these are relevant to Shinuyama, but the Earth Serpent lets you take a variety of positive scales, and I've explained what the different scales do and why they're good. So, I've got some production, which is going to help me expand, and I've got a good amount of money coming in, and my research has increased. I also took Heat 1 instead of Cold 1, because, Cold 1 is better for the first year, like I had mentioned in my previous video series, but I'm taking the Earth Serpent, and the Earth Serpent would like things to be at least a little bit warm. I'm also playing a Fire Nation. Whether or not they like things to be warm is a little debatable, because there's a spell that counter fire spells called Rain. But then also, for certain fire spells, they have increased effects in heat. Oh, excuse me, I just skipped over something. The reason you might take cold to go with rain is that cold scales turns rain into snow, which, somewhat oddly, although I guess it kind of makes sense, makes it less effective at countering fire spells. And I only took 5 Dominion because it's kind of like the average amount of Dominion you can take. You won't have any problems with this much Dominion. You couldn't recruit a lot of Sacreds, but your nation doesn't have Sacreds at all. Anyway, so it's not a problem. Now, let's get into the game. I've already got one set up.